videos about how to shoot food, and they all said, "Boy, you have to have that lens."
Jeff, you're live.
We're live. Okay, hi. It's Jeff Pulver together with Monty, San, Amy today. But if it's Monday, you know it's time for Ask the Oracles. And today we have a special guest, and our subject today is going to be boundaries. But before we kick into the hi, Lauren and Harry, thank you for making the show possible. Before we kick into our guest, just have to check in with Monty. How was your week? How was the past 7 days for you?
It's been exciting. I mean, I get the colds on Tuesday, and then they last till Sunday. Amy's cold, as she got it the other day. We actually went to New York City. We got the call from one of her major clients who happens to own 4 art galleries, three in Switzerland and 1 in New York. And she wanted some clothes, and Amy had some clothes, so we went to New York City, and it's the first time since before the pandemic, and it's Christmas, so New York is very pretty.
How was that for both of you? How was that experience?
All we did is drive there, park in the garage that I had to tip him really well to get into because it's totally full, and then drove right home because we're taking care of Zane, and we were away from him for 9 hours, and he was pissed off literally and showed us using that method that he's not happy that we were gone for 9 hours. And but he's back to normal. We're back to normal. Everything's great. I'm super excited. I was even dreaming about the subject of boundaries because I know that we're going to be having Liz on. Hi, Liz.
Hi. Hello.
Welcome back.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here.
Yes, and I never realized how important boundary is to me because I think it's like a fish in water. You know, the fish doesn't see the water. I'm all about, I don't know where boundaries stop or the boundary of boundaries and me being like a vindictive prick happens, you know, the demarcation line. I'm hoping that you'll help me figure that out.
Well, could you help maybe even start the conversation by helping to define what boundaries are? Like, what does the word boundaries mean?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a really good place to start because boundaries are, I keep hearing people talk about boundaries. I think it's a little bit trendy right now, but boundaries exist all the time, right? We all have them. They are things that really help us to figure out what is acceptable for us, right? What we consider acceptable and appropriate behavior within our relationships. And those relationships aren't just with our interpersonal relationships, but also with our professional relationships. I think sometimes people confuse boundaries as a way to control other people, right? You can't just go around saying that crosses my boundaries with everything that everyone does that kind of annoys you. It doesn't quite work like that, right? So we also need to be fair and mature in terms of how we're setting our boundaries. And we also have to remember that other people have boundaries as well. I think in the spiritual space, when we do things like readings, when we run classes, when maybe we're not necessarily working professionally, but we are really connected to our intuition, we're really sensitive, we're very open, boundaries become particularly important because Monty, as you're saying, everything can just feel so open and porous, and we want to be connected to each other. And it's really easy for those lines to become blurred sometimes in terms of, where do our feelings begin and end, and what are we needing to take on from other people, and also what is appropriate for other people to hear from us as well, in terms maybe of messages, downloads we're receiving, impressions we're getting of them. So I think that this is a really important topic for people like us, right, who are interested in things like divination, because it gets really slippery.
Yeah, and I have to say that you are the perfect person for this because I have been impressed in the past. Sometimes you'll do a post about an issue and some of them have been about boundaries, and I always agree with you.
Well, thank you.
Well, I do. I think you have a real hand on it. Jeff and I were talking before. We're like nice guys. He's a lot nicer than I am because Aquarians, and I'm a Leo rising, so I come off as really, I'm everybody's friend, but actually I'm not. But Jeff is actually much nicer than I am. So, and when you're a nice person, that's one of the reasons that you need boundaries, right, Jeffrey?
I agree. I was going to first, before I jump in, Monty, how would you define boundaries before I jump in on it?
Um, boundaries is such a large part of the law that the boundaries, it turns out, boundaries are a large part of my law, because boundaries are in property law, boundaries are in my reach of my fist stops at your face. All these kind of laws exist because of boundary issues. You talk about Solomon when they talked about he was going to cut the baby in half because of all these disputes. Why are there legal issues? It's always about boundaries. It's always about somebody trying to do something that goes past a logical thing. Boundaries to me is in a way like racism. When people violate boundaries, it's stupid and it's lazy because you're just using, you feel like you can just do whatever the hell you want, and you can't. You can't just do whatever the hell you want. You can't yell fire in a crowded room. I mean, I don't really define boundaries except by living them. So it's hard for me to
Right.
put it in words.
No, because when you speak about it contextually, from my perspective, for me, it's like when people obviously take advantage of a situation where they push me beyond my comfort. And I don't mind being pushed beyond my comfort, but if there's a line in the sand that says, I'll help you for this amount of time, and all of a sudden 60 minutes becomes, 75, it's okay. Once it becomes 2 hours, you kind of push my boundary on how much time I wanted to spend in something. Or
give him 5 minutes and you're so nice. I mean, we have this discussion a lot, Liz. I'm sorry.
Mm-hmm.
Drives me crazy. He's too nice.
Well, right. And the thing about too nice, right, is the challenge, of course, happens when we when our nice is pushed to the edge, right, where we almost are pushed over the edge, and now we're not nice, and because we're protecting ourselves, or a part of us speaks up because our other part is being passive, and the active side of us stands up for our boundaries, and all of a sudden now we're mean. But really, all we're doing is we're standing up for who we are to provide space so that we can breathe and not have our air taken out. And yet at that moment, if you're dealing with another entity, a person, it might appear like you're being mean to them, but really all you're doing is protecting your boundaries, protecting your frontier. And I find that if I'm doing a reading with somebody and you answer a question and they want more, there's sometimes a limitation of how much more you can give.
Sometimes they want more.
Okay, they always want more. They always want more.
Yeah, really? Come on.
But they may go ask direct questions which you really don't have an answer to, and they push, and so how do you eventually say stop?
But check this out. I mean, like racism, I don't know what it is. I think women know more about boundary issues than any man could ever know because of just the way things, we're coming out of the dark ages. So Liz, the ball's in your court. I mean, because I just think that, men know boundary issues in one way, but women know it in a completely different way.
Yeah, I mean, I think, what Jeff is speaking to really is that feeling of guilt, right? And that's something that we can all struggle with. And that's a really good distinction to make within ourselves, just from my experience, because I'm a recovering people pleaser. So, I know that feeling of when you have to say no to someone, but you probably deliberate about it for hours before you actually have to give that answer because you feel so bad about it. But one thing that I've learned in allowing myself to set better and stronger boundaries is that sometimes people actually appreciate it. So we shouldn't assume how that no will be delivered, right? I have friends who have completely admitted that they love it when people set boundaries for them because they don't understand boundaries instinctively or intuitively. So they're always just like, just tell me if I'm doing the wrong thing so that I don't lose our friendship. So, consider that when we're saying no to people, that they might actually really want that and need that, because we all approach relationships differently. And sometimes people want that structure of being led by the other person. And I think when we're working in a professional capacity, doing things like readings, clients also appreciate someone who is in charge when they come into your space and you sit down and you set some expectations from the beginning. people really begin to trust that, because otherwise, if everything is really loose and free flowing, and it's kind of left up to the client to figure out, how is this session going to go? How am I going to work with this practitioner? That sometimes can actually feel a little bit confusing for them, because they start to think that maybe they're supposed to be in charge and they don't know what to do, because they're the one who's hired you, right? So the person that they're paying, the person that they're coming to for advice and guidance, really has to be in that leadership role of setting the tone the whole way through.
Well, here at Ask the Oracles, our boundaries at the very beginning have been no politics and no health, so that
Right.
we cover everything but those two things. So on one level, you could say, well, those are our, content boundaries, that we will not pierce through that knowingly, that's our edge, if you will, right? And we respect that, and I do think that whenever I start a conversation, whether it's spiritual guidance or business guidance, there is boundaries set as well as expectations. In some cases, the boundaries are the expectations, where I'm giving someone advice about where to take their business. I push the edge at times, because I just had this yesterday when I was coaching a friend of mine who was pitching me his boring startup. I apologize if you're watching right now. And I shared a way to make it super exciting with logarithmic growth. And by the end of the conversation, he loved it. He loved it. And I apologized to him for not being interested in his boring startup, but I got him thinking outside his boundaries that he set, because we're living from a technical perspective. We're transitioning as people of the internet from one version of the internet to the other version. And granted, the people who he's pitching are of a certain age where they understand what they understand. And I said to him, okay, well, you can pitch these people and get funded to do that business, but 3 years from now, everything's going to be different. And you might want to consider a different approach, not because they won't understand you, but because you want to still be in business. And it's sort of sunk in. And so but boundaries for me is like, I don't knowingly want to tell someone things to make them upset. But at the same time, if there's a truth to be shared, I don't hesitate in saying that truth.
Yeah, but here's what you got to remember. To think that somebody can't handle the truth is insulting them, actually.
Yes.
And there's a book called Autobiography of Yogi, which is a book that I read early on in my life, luckily. And Yogananda had a teacher named Sri Yukteswara, and in it he goes through this whole thing where he comes out and he says, the truth is not afraid of questions. And that is a big issue that I see in the media today, because the cancel culture comes right back to what Liz was saying before about using boundaries to control. But it's just like Jack Nicholson and A Few Good Men saying, you can't handle the truth.
Right.
You are too nice to people. I don't mean you, I mean a person is too nice to people. It's as if to say you can't handle the truth. You're too weak, or you're too stupid, or whatever. I'm not saying engage with everybody, because a lot of my boundaries are just, I don't talk about it. What's the point? What's the point? I don't know. Does that make sense, Liz?
Yeah, it makes sense. And I think when it comes to boundaries, we don't have to walk around saying, this is my boundary and this is my boundary and this is my boundary, right? And this is another thing I think that sometimes people misunderstand about boundary work. Boundary work really just looks like, if your friend is chronically late and you value punctuality, at some point you have to tell them, look, I love hanging out with you. I love it when we get together, but you've been late the last 3 times we made plans and I've been on time. That's setting the boundary. That's letting them know that, you like the relationship, you care about this person. It's nothing to take personally, but that it's really important for you that people meet you on time, right? Our boundaries come through when we have businesses and we set policies. A refund policy is a boundary. A rescheduling policy is a boundary. I have very strict policies around time, because time for me is one of my greatest values. So, I am probably not the right person for people who need a lot of flexibility when they're working with a practitioner, right? And that's okay. it's also okay to recognize that sometimes our boundaries are not going to be compatible with each other. And one of us has to choose how, whether we're still going to commit to that relationship, even if it's a one-time relationship, right? A one-off meeting or interaction, or if we're just so incompatible that we have to part ways. That's also okay, right? I think, to your point, Monty, we can't infantilize each other in assuming that everything has to work out all the time, right? It's actually okay to realize that sometimes we're really different in terms of how we want to work, how we want to move through the world, and a lot of conflict can be avoided when we just actually accept that within each other, and learn also how to respect that a little bit, because we do all have different relationships with time, money, experiences, right? And it's fine.
I'm sitting here listening to you and I'm thinking how much I respect you for what you're saying. I don't know whether it's gunfighters respecting another gunfighter or what, but I think people with strong boundaries respect people who have boundaries. It's like one of the reasons I met Amy and that I am happily married for 46 years is when I fucked up, she told me. And if I asked her a question, she told me the truth, whether it was something that she thought I wanted to hear or not. And I want that. And I think any person who's committed to spiritual growth wants the truth. They don't want to stand there and say, once again, Jack Nicholson. I think about that scene all the time. You can't handle the truth, right? I mean,
the thing is, when you're talking, I'm not really, I would never go to a sports metaphor, but specifically with boundaries, there's a lot of what you're talking about in the spiritual side that I see a direct connection in the sports world. Because if you're playing baseball, for example, and you're sitting there getting a 90-mile-an-hour fastball thrown at you, it's boundaries that define whether you're going to walk or whether you're going to strike out based on being passive. When you hit a home run, it could be inches between getting a home run and getting a foul ball,
which is called out of bounds, by the way.
Right, and of course, when you're playing football, the people run out of bounds, right, or you run out of the baseline, or when you're playing tennis and you're having a volley and it falls out. But those professional athletes respect boundaries because they have to, because they understand the rules, right? And so the spectators appreciate the playing because they appreciate the rules. So there's an understanding of boundaries bound by the set of rules wherever they go. If you look in organized religion, there's certain confidence or understandings of rules to be part of a tribe and how we are.
The third rail of boundaries, organized religion.
Well, I'm just, so, but there's a framework, and then when we talk with friends, right, and I totally appreciate, Liz, the idea of having non-compatible boundaries, which you find out real fast when you meet someone new. And that could be all sorts of metaphors, but it could be anything and everything, and just even things that you want to talk about. Just when you're sitting down with tea or coffee with somebody, things that you want to just talk about, because you could say, well, that's out of my comfort zone. And being out of your comfort zone is not necessarily a bad thing. But if it's outside your boundaries, and the other person doesn't respect it, that's what shuts down conversations for me. It's where I'm talking to somebody and they keep on pushing in an area where I don't want to go. If I don't stop it, I have to stop that, right? So there's an innate incompatibility at that point.
Yeah, and some of those things also, come down to what type of relationship you have with each other too, right? So it's hard on social media, I think, these days, because we might be sharing something on social media that we're just really expressing. Sometimes you might want to just sit down and write something and put it out there. And it's not always easy to know kind of what's appropriate there, I think, for people in terms of, they may feel really close to you, but they might be a total stranger, right? But maybe they see things that you're talking about online. They really relate to what you're talking about. They may feel inspired to reach out and share something or ask you further questions, maybe ask you for advice. Those things can get a little bit tricky sometimes when we realize, we don't have a personal relationship with everybody who is engaging or interacting with us these days. And we have to make personal choices around where do we draw the lines when it comes to our own self-expression and how open we want to be, and whether we feel it's appropriate to then enter into a one-on-one relationship with someone who might be asking us things that we would feel more comfortable reserving for a close friend, a family member, right? Someone who has that kind of level of access and intimacy to your life already. So those things, I think that, you know, those are all things that we have to make personal decisions about. But I also discourage people in general from feeling as though they need to be an open book with everybody all the time, because it gets tiring, right? And when you're a nice person, you're a friendly person, it's very easy, I think, for people to sometimes perceive you as a friend, right? When you're really just being friendly. And there's also a difference there. And we all have to be okay with sometimes saying, you know what, I just don't feel comfortable sharing that right now, or I'm tired today. And that's a really loaded question for me. So I'm not going to go there at this time. And likewise, we need to be okay when other people perhaps put a wall up, when we maybe extend some kindness or curiosity about their life. And maybe they say, you know what, I appreciate you asking, but I just can't go there right now.
Yeah. In my own case, I have the opposite problem in the sense that as an Aquarius with Leo rising, I'm willing to go anywhere in a conversation, but I have to think, do I want to uncloak, like in Star Trek with the Predator, what are the Klingon vessel? Do I want to let this person know how I really feel about this? You know, there's every sign, every planet, every house has an extreme, and the extreme with Aquarians is they are willing to upset the apple cart. Mm-hmm. And usually the thing with boundaries is somebody's apple cart gets upset. So I'm willing to engage if they want to talk about it, but at the same time, what I'm going to say is going to reveal things about myself and is going to make them uncomfortable. So a lot of the times I just will pretend I don't hear it because I'm, big, dumb looking guy. So I can just get away with it that way. Oh, he's just so dumb and big, just forget it. But there's two sides of the spectrum. But what you said is 100% true. Someone's asking, I think Amanda's asking about family issues. I had a family member contact me out of the blue who I haven't spoken to since the 90s and say, why don't you give my father a call? And I'm just like, what? You mean the father that insulted me on my wedding day and I've never had anything to do with him ever since? And that's what I meant before about I have to look at it within myself to make sure that it's a boundary issue and that I'm not just being vindictive. But at the same time, you just don't want to open yourself up. You don't want to lead with your face and then get punched every time you deal with people. That's my attitude towards family. I mean, wow. you guys are, brother and sister are right here on the Zoom screen. So you guys are amazing. So I love it, but I have a great relationship with my sister, but at the same time, she has a lot of beliefs that are different than mine. Let's put it that way. I mean, it's great. You guys even can live together sometimes, which is amazing.
Yes, it's true. But I mean, like for professional boundaries, like when you're writing a book, Monty, and you think you're writing a book about one thing, do you ever have a situation where your editor comes in and tells you, by the way, we want you to cover something else? And how do you handle that?
No, but the copy editors are great because if you don't hate them, they're not doing their job. They'll come in and say, this is ridiculous. It's the thing you love the most about the book. And they'll say, well, this makes no sense. This has to go. And then they're doing their job because it's something that you're too close to and you think it's more important than it is. And you figure out a better way to say it. But in books, I think when you're writing, because Amanda, where's Amanda? She was just here. So, Liz, you've done books. You know how it is.
Yeah, I mean, I think my boundary with books is much. I don't worry too much about the editing process and that, because I always find that editors will usually make me sound really great. So I'm cool with that. But one thing where I draw the line, and this may be helpful for others who are tuning in who are also working professionally with clients, is that, sometimes clients will become really comfortable with you and you develop a relationship with them and they know that you do these other projects and they'll start to ask questions like, what's your next book about? Right. And those are things where I don't mind saying I'm working on a book, but I don't disclose certain things like ideas. I don't talk about really a lot of my I don't mind sharing a little bit of creative process if they're curious or they want to write themselves and they ask, how often do you write or something like that? That's fine, right? That stuff is, I probably have blogs about those things anyway that's already out there. But I don't really start to talk about my own ideas. I don't talk about my feelings around books. I wouldn't start to kind of open up to them and say, oh, I'm not having a really good day as a writer right now. All of that stuff I keep off the table. And the reason for that is that those are things that I share with my friends, right? They're not things that I share with my clients. And so I think we just have to be mindful sometimes, again, of who's in our inner circle and what's appropriate to be sharing within our inner circle, and then what starts to feel inappropriate to share outside of that circle. And it's not that, again, clients can't handle it. They may be really interested, but they're not there for me to talk about myself or my feelings or my projects or my plans. It's, I don't want to spend this time distracting them with all of that. My job is to just kind of get them back and focused on what we're really there for, which is them. And we can have a few minutes of small talk, but I have to, I also maintain a strong boundary for their sake, right? Because I don't want it to become, all about me. And again, I have other people that I talk to about that stuff, right? So, I don't need that.
That's the point. Jeffrey, one interesting thing that does happen is people will ask us about how to do a book, or they'll want to show us their ideas, and it's like, no, I don't want to see it. I might look at what happened to Robert Redford with Downhill Racer. That's a very famous script that he was sued for and lost because someone had shown it to him years ago, and then he did something that was sort of similar. And you don't know that the person, what they're going to be showing you might be something you're working on that you have to deal with, and the next thing you know, you're in court. So boundaries from that aspect are very interesting. Now that you're writing your new book, Jeffrey, you'll find out all about it.
So, but thank you. And do you ever have delayed boundary reactions that you speak to someone like today, and like 6 months from now, all of a sudden the person you were speaking to tells you now it's 6 months from now that you broke their boundaries or they felt uncomfortable? Cause that happens to me sometimes, where I'm talking to somebody, friend or client or someone who might be a client, but I accidentally breached what they felt was a boundary. And they make it a point to tell me the next time I see them about that. And I don't know what to do other than apologize.
Yeah, but they're lucky that they're talking to you at all. I mean, maybe that's a harassing kind of thing. I mean, God, next time that happens, put me on the phone. Because Amy and I, we joke around. There's something called Outward Bound, and we always think we should teach a course in outward boundaries. Wow. That would be the name of the book. Okay, usually I don't share titles, but I think if I'm going to do the book, Liz, that's what it's going to be, Outward Boundaries.
Nice.
Yeah.
Well, Jeff, I think in a situation like that, I have had a couple times where people have done, they've crossed their own boundaries, right? And then later they've kind of said, actually, that this crosses a boundary for me. I can't do it this way, or I can't work this way. And that's fine. But I think, part of that comes down to personal responsibility as well, right? We all have to make sure that those are things that we are managing. And so, in some ways it's great, they're telling you, right? They're telling you, yes, it's a little bit later, but they're telling you after the fact, and maybe it makes them feel better just to get that out. Who knows? I think, again, these are things sometimes that we do catch ourselves on later, right? There have been lots of times where, I've been patient with people and sometimes too patient. And then I realize that as you were saying earlier, Jeff, sometimes people take advantage of that, right? And I realize, okay, I have to now set a boundary, and it feels a little bit retroactive because it can be confusing. Like, well, but you were letting me do this before, and now I'm learning that you're not okay with it. But at some point, you have to set it. So those things happen, but I do think that other times people may, for whatever reason, just, feel like they let something happen. And the only way that they can get back in control of it is to go back and say, actually, this crossed a boundary, even if it was a long time ago. But those hopefully become lessons for those individuals. And even if we're personally having experiences like that ourselves, it just becomes a lesson for them to be more assertive in the first place and more aware of how those, cutting off those interactions before they become a problem. I think that this is something, this is work that we're doing constantly, right? It's because every relationship is different and everybody behaves differently, and we all have different ideas of what is appropriate and what isn't. You're never going to have perfect interactions across the board for the rest of your life.
But if you're coaching someone to take chances or to go beyond because you know that they have certain abilities, and you've seen it, maybe they're a great artist, maybe they're a great surfer, and you want to encourage them to go outside their comfort zone. Would so breaking boundaries is one thing. How do you associate the word comfort zone, even spiritually, connecting to boundaries? Because I find myself pushing people to the edge where I know they can do, because I've seen them do amazing things. I don't feel any remorse in pushing them, not to break their boundary necessarily, but I want them to be at their best, and once they see they're great, they feel great about it. But how do you, like, if you hear the word boundary and the word comfort zone, how do you, does comfort zone have any meaning to either one of you in a spiritual context?
I think if you want to be a pioneer, you can't worry about boundaries.
Yes, this is true. But that's me. I don't want to talk, but I have to ask.
But the definition of a pioneer is, besides the fact that they're the ones with the arrows in their back, not to be racist, but to go beyond boundaries. So, when I invented karma cards, I wasn't going to think like, oh, no one is, or someone's done that before. When you're trying to push the boundaries as a pioneer, that's what you're trying to do. Or when you're trying to write any book, you're trying to say something that you think people should hear, right? I mean, right, Liz? I mean,
yeah. So I think this is a different definition of boundaries. Is you're talking about doing something that's innovating. It's changing something within the collective
paradigm.
Yeah, which is a bit different than having a personal boundary around, say, being on time, right? Or or being pushed to talk about something that maybe you're really you don't feel is appropriate for that moment in time or for that relationship. So I think that, this is an interesting question, actually, because I agree, Jeff, we can't be so rigid that we never change or grow, right? But we also can't go our whole lives with, such loose boundaries that we're just reacting to what everybody else wants from us all the time either. So there's a balance in these things, but it's also, I think, important to see them as separate, right? To look at, when am I creating other rules for myself in terms of deciding just how far I can go with something, right? Versus when am I really clear in terms of what I value and what's important for me and what's appropriate for me, so that I can really feel like my relationships are healthy, I'm balanced, and I'm receiving respect from other people, but I'm also in a position to give respect to other people because I have a really strong understanding of why my interpersonal boundaries help us all to succeed, right? Because they really do. I think that when we're really clear in who we are and how we can understand each other as well, and what our hard and soft boundaries are, then things become so much easier, right? Because then a lot of conflict starts to get diminished, even within ourselves. We're not sitting there kind of, again, going over these narratives in our head of what we could have or should have said to that person who was half an hour late for their appointment.
No, and you mentioned that, and I have flashbacks to being in college, and a certain friend of mine who always was late every time we went out together, always was late, to the point where after 2 months I said no more. Because I couldn't take it anymore. I appreciated their company, but after so many weeks, or he would cancel. It's the best thing is we have plans and literally look at the clock 20 minutes before, can't make it. And it's but that was so it got to the point where it just shut me down from ever going out with that person, because I couldn't handle it was just predictable, and it just bothered me. And so until I put the hammer down and said no more, then when we did actually go out, he was respectful of time. And while I didn't go out as often, at least I knew that when we were going out, we were going to have fun. At least I thought we would have fun. And so that set that opportunity. And so, yeah, I think there's a big difference in the interpersonal side and maybe the business professional side where, and to Monty's point, I do I've had many situations in my life where I go beyond what's expected because that's how I make things, how I help contribute to changing the future, right? I don't let the boundaries get in the way of just because it hasn't been done before doesn't mean it can't be done. So I take that, and the word boundary comes into the vernacular when I talk to other people, not from a spiritual context, but from a making things happen perspective. But if someone were to ask, how do you, we recognize the boundaries we have. We're working with clients. We respect their boundaries. But do you, either one of you, ever think about how your boundaries were created? Like how you got to the point where these are my boundaries now?
I'm definitely thinking about it now. And as a matter of fact, I realized, like, I grew up with a NYPD sergeant father and a mentally ill, hospitalized in mental institutions mother. And I had no way to control what my mother would say. So the in terms of boundaries, I didn't even know what they were. First of all, it would just be, you have to deal with what's coming at you. That was my situation as a child, and I did not like it. But at the same time, that's what was going on. So this whole conversation is actually really beneficial to me, especially in the fact that I'm never going to be late again for anybody, the whole world. Because I think one of the problems with boundaries is you don't realize it's the other person's boundary. You're just, you're just like a puppy chewing the term paper, and you're just doing it, and you didn't mean to do it, but it's the person wanted the term paper. Sorry, Liz, I had to jump in.
No, I actually find that a lot of the boundaries that I have now are there because of people who cross my boundaries, really. I think that, again, these are things that are always evolving, and we just learn a lot about ourselves as time goes on. There are things that I would have let slide, when I was, I was kind of in college or something, that I wouldn't let slide now, right? Because I'm just in a different point in my life. And I think when you're doing something like running a business, or you have a creative practice, you have things all of a sudden where you really feel like there's something at stake. You start to also really value your time differently and your energy differently, because you realize, I don't want to waste my time, and I don't want people who are maybe wasting my time, or again, who are coming in perhaps acting in ways that introduce some kind of chaos or element into my day or my life or my work, that prevents me from really showing up in the way that I need to.
Yeah, but so that when people want something from someone else, they're more likely to start this feedback loop where, let's say I'm in your position with time, and the person's late and they're late, but I want something. I want them to buy what I have, or I want a job with this person, or I'm interested in them romantically. Then the people let it slide, and then they get mad at themselves, and this whole feedback loop starts. And then when it comes down to the fact when they finally have the conversation, let's say it's a relationship or romantic, and they get together and they feel comfortable enough where the person says, that thing you do kind of annoys me. It gets blown out of all proportion because there's all this energy from that.
It can, but I think that, it does depend on the situation, but when I look at things from, say, a client practitioner relationship, this may sound controversial, because I know that in our North American society, we're supposed to believe that the customer is always right and blah, 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 blah. I actually encourage people not to think that way. I really believe that if you are working in a professional capacity, you want to work with your ideal client most of the time. And so for you, if your ideal client is someone who's punctual, right, who's committed to working with you, who's really invested also and wants to be there, that's your ideal client. You don't want the person, who's kind of, half in, half out, really wishy-washy towards your work, isn't really concerned about being there on time, isn't really concerned about what kind of policies you have or anything like that. Like, aim to always have the quality customer, because those other people, they can go somewhere else. There's a lot of work out there for everybody, right?
Yeah.
They'll find a practitioner who maybe doesn't care, right?
Wow.
That's great. And that would be a great match for those two, but I always encourage practitioners to go and find the people who are matched with your values, because those are the people who are going to love you. They will love what you do. Don't worry about the rest of it. I know that's controversial to say, because we're always supposed to be like, I want the sale and I want the money. It's like, no, forget that. Sometimes that's going to cost you so much in terms of your time and energy. It's not going to be worth it.
Well, it goes to wanting to basically fire certain clients because you'd rather not have them because they just totally shift you. But that goes to a question I have is, do either one of you have a ritual where a certain time during a month or during some time during your solar year that you look at where you're doing, who you're working with, and who you want to get rid of, and you just periodically just prune? Like, is there any type of ritual?
No, I mean, the advantage of being a counselor or a consultant in that sense is that the customer is never right, because if they were right, they wouldn't be coming to you in the first place. So I try and only see people once. I was friends with a man named Dr. Jerry Epstein, who wrote a book called Healing Visualizations and some other books. And as a psychiatrist, he was an MD psychiatrist, he only wanted to see people once or twice. He thought that psychiatrists who have you coming back, week after week, month after month, he thought that was crap. Because if and he used guided imagery a lot. He thought if you give the people the tools, they shouldn't have to come back every week. That's more like, my readings are designed to do it yourself, to help people do it yourself. I'm not saying that it's wrong to have people who come back every month, but if they're asking the same question every month, I don't want to hear it. I mean, that's just me, though.
Yeah, I love this question, Jeff. I've never thought about it that way before. You're going to get me thinking on this now in terms of it being a ritual. But I have had times where, I've realized there are certain clients that I've worked with for a while, and some of them are people who have been maybe doing private classes and things like that with me, where I just realized, at some point I want them to grow on from me. Like I might enjoy our working relationship. I enjoy seeing them, but I also want them to try someone different sometimes, just again, because I start to think, I think I've taken them as far as I'm able to, right? And I know that if I let them go and allow them to explore other teachings, explore other practitioners, play around with what they've learned and really integrate it for a while, that they'll just fly on their own. And I can see that in them, right? And they may not be able to see that in themselves, and they might think, no, I really want to keep going. But I think that it is important to start to recognize, and that's a boundary as well, right? And again, boundaries don't always have to be harsh and about kind of, again, what's always about our schedules or our time or anything, but they can also just be in recognizing that, again, here's a line we're going to draw just for now. And and we'll see how we grow from there.
Those are, I have to say that this, I'm sorry Amy's not on this one because she has such amazing insights, but this is actually, I think, one of the most important shows we've ever done, because in terms of interpersonal relationships that extend to business relationships, this is where the rubber meets the road, this issue.
Mm-hmm. It's something that I see people struggle a lot with in the divination or spiritual community on a whole. And it really does go both ways as well. I don't know how much experience or how many observations you've had in this, Jeff and Monty, but sometimes I also notice other practitioners will come in to, they'll come on people's Instagram lives and start promoting their own services. They'll get on people's paid ads and, put their website in there. They do things sometimes. I'm like, guys, we're all peers here, right? We're all working in the same industry. It's sloppy. Don't do that. Don't do those things. I think sometimes people who are still also working at the professional level in this community sometimes just do things where I think like that's a big boundary violation. Asking also, other practitioners sometimes for proprietary information, right? I've heard of a lot of practitioners who are successful and they get all kinds of people asking them for information about, things they're working on and how much money they make, and private information that they may not, again, it's not appropriate to necessarily share with a stranger.
We have had at Amy's openings other artists at the opening handing out their invitations to their opening. I mean, people do.
Oh yeah, no.
Well, I mean, people are crazy. Plus, I worked as a bodyguard in the film industry, and I saw things that you just wouldn't believe. I saw this woman with her children come up to Michael J. Fox and say, "Go ahead, touch him. He doesn't mind." Like he's an animal in a petting zoo.
Oh my God.
Yeah, for
Wow.
real. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, I'll tell you this on a professional side, when I ran a rather large trade show and conference, when I saw competitors walking our show floor, giving out pamphlets and brochures for their events, I had their asses thrown out. I did not hesitate one bit.
So you
And
should.
I had a absolute, you will not mess with me and my home turf policy. And so known competitors could not walk our show floor. Certainly they couldn't solicit. And I got to the point where I may have banned certain people from ever registering, because it's like, if they're going to come here and use my venue to take advantage of what I've created, no.
Right.
So
And
they break my boundary, they're out. And I have
just
no
want to
problem.
Jeffrey's show had over 7,000 people attending. We're not talking about, like the Renaissance Fair. We're talking about, and not that the Renaissance Fair doesn't get 7,000 people, but I'm talking about 7,000 people filling the San Jose Convention Center with, booths from IBM and AT&T and, that level of, I can't believe people did that, Jeff.
Well, they did that. So I knew almost exactly everyone who was at my show, because I took a personal approach to scanning the database. And if somebody was silly enough to identify with a real name and the real company affiliation, they were booted out. And I had people on the show floor whose job it was look aisle to aisle every day that we were open to look for solicitations. And what was so kind were some of the exhibitors they told me about the people, because when we didn't know about it. And frankly, they felt annoyed because we charged like $2,000 a ticket for people to come to the conference. And so they were looking for quality leads. The last thing they wanted to do was to be solicited to go to another conference. It was not worth their time. And so I created a better value for them by not wasting their time by being solicited. So it worked so it was good for my side and it was good for them. So it was a win-win.
The unfortunate thing is boundaries work negatively for some really good causes. There's like charities that you give to once and then they inundate you with enough paperwork and snail mail to where you feel like, well, I gave them enough money and they spent all my money soliciting me for more charity stuff. And that's what I mean. This is a super important topic. I'm so glad
boundaries for work, for life, for living. I think there's boundaries all over. And then, earlier on, there's also other questions about boundaries in family. Like, how do you create those rules? Like, and so it's like, it's like there's not necessarily when you wake up and you're at a certain age, there's a book of clues to read where you actually know the answers. Where, this is the book of clues when you're 17. This is the book of clues when you're 47. What do you do? And so for you to come up with your own set of rules and be malleable enough, but then comfortable enough to support or do what you based on your principles, right? So because I think it's okay to say that our boundaries evolve in time, that as our knowledge increases, that we will become more sophisticated in how we enforce our boundaries, how we grow our boundaries, how we build our boundaries. And that, we may, as kids, we may not know we need boundaries, right? So we get bullied or things happen to us because we don't know better. But as we get smarter, we're able to evolve who we are and what we do, both interpersonal and ultimately in business and in school. And I do think there's lots of different issues depending upon our age, where we are, and what's happening around us.
Yeah, it's hard too with, when you're a kid, you also don't always know what is appropriate, right? So, I grew up in a house where my mom had no respect for my boundaries. So I had no privacy. If, she felt that something was her business, it was her business. So if she wanted to go and, go through my things, look in my journal, whatever it was, everything was hers. And when I was growing up, I thought that that's just how moms were, right? And then now, as an adult, I have friends who have kids and they're like, they respect their kids' privacy and they, they want their kids to be independent and everything. I had a different experience with my mom, but when I became an adult, I realized, some of those things that I thought were normal were actually not at all. And that, there was a reason why I felt uncomfortable about it, but I didn't have that language yet. We can't always fix those things with our families, right? They might cause, unfortunately, ongoing conflict. But we can at least change how we might interact with some of those family members as well, right? So over time, I realized there are just some things that, my mom couldn't handle the responsibility of knowing about
Right.
me,
And
right?
and the elephant in the room is that so many people are on pills or are addicted to drinking or whatever. And that screws with your boundary issues too. Because it's the drug talking or the drink talking or whatever addiction that you're lying about. And I mean, the culture. I've read so many weird statistics about 70% of the country is on antidepressant pills. I find that hard to believe. But when one of the things I think that people are sad about, besides the fact that we all die, which is a pain in the ass, I admit it. But at this, I think people are sad because people are not reacting well to what's going on with their life, and then they make misery loves miserable company. So then they go and they try and make other people miserable, and then you end up with the cancel culture, where people are trying to control everybody.
Yeah, that's also sometimes what happens with, that experience that Jeff shared earlier as well, where sometimes people are retroactively setting boundaries later, right? Because, they're realizing that things are not quite going right all the time in terms of those relationships. And so they're kind of working backwards and saying, I should have fixed this and I should have done that and I should have done that, right? This is it so often just comes back to being really clear and confident in who we are, even if sometimes it's not always comfortable to, I think, be assertive in that way if we're not used to it, right? Again, when I was growing up, if I told my mom, like, I want to keep the door to my room closed, it's a huge deal. It was a huge deal to ask for that, right? So it's hard, I think, too, and sometimes people come from experiences like that where they've tried to set boundaries, perhaps not consciously. I wasn't thinking I'm setting a boundary with my mom as an 8-year-old, right? But you know what I mean? It's, you're not always conscious of what you're doing. But then when it comes time to actually, as an adult, say, to someone that you're working with, can you maybe talk on the phone a little bit quieter because I can't concentrate? It's really hard, right? Really, really hard, because you start to expect that everyone is going to push back because that's what you're used to.
Yeah.
Right? It can be really uncomfortable in that way. Mm-hmm.
And it's also then, how people react to our requests for boundaries. That also sets our expectations, particularly when you're young. And you have certain, because whether it was right or wrong at that time, and I'm not even judging what right and wrong is, but whatever our experiences is when we're young, when we get older, if we don't have a reset, then that's what we think is normal, right? And then we have this whole other conversation, what's normal, and then because our boundaries work within the coexistence of our space, our time continuum, and we are our own expectations for what normal is, or our own expectations for boundaries, is definitely influenced by our experiences. I mean, you may get downloads of what it should be, but then you have your own coexistence to think about what you want, and that's why so I appreciate the I understand how cancel culture happened, because I relate that to people who I speak to 6 months from now or a year later who reset, who almost are revisionists in setting how our conversation was, because they revisit it. And that's when they tell me I crossed boundaries, when I'm telling you at the time, in that moment, there was nothing uncomfortable. And I'm super sensitive. So I can tell if I say something by accident that not hurt someone, but just gets there, I know. I don't have to ask you. I know that I did it, and I didn't do it on purpose, but I'm aware of it. So for someone to come back in time and tell me I hit something, it kind of got me thinking. That's why I was thinking about, does it ever happen to anyone else? And I think it does. Maybe it just has a different form that it shows up in. We're running up to the last 5 minutes of our podcast, our live show on boundaries on here on Ask the Oracles. And do you guys have any closing remarks? Anything you'd like to share about boundaries that people can just take with and ponder upon?
Yeah, I think people have to be very understanding of people, because right now, just the way children imitate the actions of their parents, we've all seen the governments act like authoritarian dictators, and I think that's one of the reasons that has trickled down as cancel culture. So when you see somebody, remember they've been in a cave just like you, and the lockdowns haven't gone away, 14 days to flatten the curve. So people don't trust people. And when people don't trust people, especially the government, they get scared. So be nice to everybody. That's what I'd like to leave everybody with.
That's it. Yeah, that's a good one. Be nice to everyone is so important, right? I think we didn't get to touch on this as much today as I would have hoped, but I think when we are doing, when we're really intuitive and we're sensitive and we're compassionate and we do kind of pick up on things that maybe people are feeling or sensing, that we also have to remember that we have boundaries within ourselves as well, right? So I think that this is something that I also see a lot of people in the community struggle with sometimes, in terms of knowing, again, what is your responsibility to take on for someone else, and where do your feelings and their feelings begin and end. And I think it's important for those of us who are involved in things like divination and readings and energy work to always be mindful that you don't have to take on everyone's stuff, right? Just as you don't have to take on a client that you know is a totally wrong fit for you. It's okay to say no if someone is coming into your professional world in a way that, again, is not respecting your time or your work, but also on that personal level. It's not your responsibility to be so compassionate and so open all the time that you feel you have to take on everyone's stuff. Allow those people to still be independent and autonomous, and trust that they can also take that responsibility on for themselves. Compassion is really important. Kindness is important, but so is that freedom and that independence and that personal responsibility that we all really need to step into.
And I think it's important to point out that a lot of the conversation today is from the practitioner's perspective, that at the same time, we also do respect our clients' boundaries. Mm-hmm. And that we would not be able to practice if we didn't have clients and respected what they did and what they were and how they felt. And so depending upon when people come into the conversation stream, there's at least two sides to every coin, right? So we could be talking from the practitioner's perspective, but from the client's perspective, I think it's just important for everyone to understand that whenever we enter a situation, we're coming at it from a positive light, that we are there to serve, we are there to engage, and that our goal is to make it a better place, and that we are respectful of each other, and that we really do this with mutual respect together.
Definitely. But I'm a great trust in God, or trust in the goddess, but tie your camel, the old Arabic expression, which now they say trust in God, but lock your car. I love everybody. I see everybody as an expression of the divine, but I don't trust anybody, because you never know. They might have had an experience that's just screwed them up so much. I think it's come from having a policeman father who said that, the only thing illegal is getting caught, that everybody's a criminal, basically, is the way cops look at you. I'm not saying be so nice to people that you're going to overextend yourself. I guess it's boundaries and appropriateness are a subject we can do another show on, because there's an appropriate level of practically everything in the world, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And Liz, thank you for joining us for a very fast hour on Ask the Oracles. And Monty, I wish Amy a speedy recovery, and thank you for your time. It's fascinating. I do think Boundaries is not only a book. Boundaries could be an entire series, because there's so many things and so many sides to it too. And again, from our perspective is different than necessarily a viewer's perspective, who's a client, who's not necessarily a practitioner. So there's there's lots of words to be felt. And I do think that, from my own work, I do a lot of on the non-spiritual side with businesses. I find bringing spirituality into a business is an interesting boundary to break, but I do that separately. But the idea of pushing is hard. So anyway, happy holidays to everyone. Thanks for tuning in. If it's Mondays, it's time for
Ask Oracle.
Thank you. Well, thank you, Lauren. Thank you, Harry. And Enchanted Worlds, get it? We have there's a contest going on right now. If you send a receipt of proof of purchase, you get entered into the contest by December 14th, if I'm not mistaken. So, it's just Liz, thank you so much.
Thank you.
I'm grateful to have you as a guest.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
The perfect guest for the
Recording stopped.
Yeah, perfect.